Hughes, there's Ellis, absent, Pritchett,
Present.
Roberts,
Here.
Sherman.
Present.
Zapolsky is not here, he may not make it, he's having childcare issues.
Thank you. Also present is Catherine Lee, the PRC officer, and from the Berkeley Police Department, we have Sergeant Rashawn Cummings. And from the Berkeley Police Association, we have Sergeant Sean Ross. The next order of business is approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair.
Today, as we all know, hundreds of thousands of students took to the streets to observe 17 minutes of silence for those students who were killed down at the archive. I know we can't take 17 minutes of silence here, but I would request that maybe, out of respect for the action they took in memory of the people who passed, that we open this meeting with a minute of silence.
I would agree with that. Everyone all right with that? Okay, we can begin now. I would also like to recognize that Chief Greenwood has not voted this. Back to approval of the agenda, are there any objections or changes to the agenda? If not, can we approve the agenda by general consent?
Do you mind speaking just a little louder, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So up next we have public comment. You'll have 3 minutes. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at this time?
You ready for it now?
Yes.
Okay, well, I would like to say what I probably said last time, that I hope you will make a recommendation to the City Council to not cooperate with the Department of Defense 1033 program. It's more like the Department of War or offense, and it adds to militarization of our police, and I don't think we want any more of that. Also, I hope I have it here, but I'm not sure, is in regard to Andrea Pritchett's attempt to get some information from the police department. I did look at the response. I just wanted to read from a leaflet on the California Public Records Act. Let's see if I can get my act together here. Really nervous, maybe not. But anyway, what you need to do is to look this up, because when something is exempt, it is not therefore undisclosable. It can be accessed for public disclosure. It might be a little more difficult, but being exempt doesn't mean that it's totally available to the public. So, sorry I have to find the exact place in this, but that's the essence of it. Something else I wanted to talk about. But, well, okay, it's my 3 minutes is almost up. I guess I can.
You have a minute and a half.
A minute and a half? Where's the agenda? The chaplain program. I hope that you will also make a recommendation to the City Council to definitely nip this in the bud, because it so glaringly violates the First Amendment of our Constitution, and it's a guarantee of separation of church and state. Thank you.
Thank you. there anyone else who would like to speak this time? Yes.
I was at City Council last night when the surveillance ordinance was passed. It will be voted on again, and I was here at the PRC the night that you had completed and presented your version of the surveillance ordinance. And I just want to thank all of you, everyone here, for all the great work you did. It's much appreciated by the community. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak?
I had 3 questions. One is, I was wondering, the figure has been given by the Berkeley Police Department that 74% of their daily work involves the homeless. I would like to ask how that actually breaks down in terms of sort of broad levels of tasks. Just sort of, not specifically, obviously, but you know, how much of that is moving homeless encampments, and how much of that is providing services, and how much of that is just getting to know people and having people get to know them. The second question is, in 2015, we had a meeting about mental illness at Berkeley Safe Neighborhoods Committee, and we were told by Officer Shannon that about 50% of calls for service of the Berkeley Police involved people who were mentally ill. And at several meetings recently, I've heard the figure 35%. So I just wondered, is there any reason for that drop in calls? Are there more people who are figuring out other ways to take care of people who are mentally ill than just calling 911? And then my third question is, we've been told that if the number of sworn officers available for work on the street in Berkeley falls too low, we're going to have the Alameda County Sheriff's officers patrolling, arresting, and interacting with Berkeley citizens. What is the actual number of Berkeley police officers who have to be available for work on the street, which is minimal, below which we would have the sheriff's office here? Because it seems to me it's good to have a sense of what that number actually is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I know I'm in the middle of a circle, so ignore that, please. I was wondering, we have plans for the homeless at like Pathways and Berkeley Way, and but there's an abundance amount of homeless people who are not served, who have drug addictions and all of that, and may or may not experience mental illness or have mental illness. I was wondering, how do we attack or approach that problem? And maybe this is to the police, I don't know. Because that is actually a big problem as well, and it causes further problems. It causes crime or vice versa. And I'm just curious as to if we can put some attention and address those needs.
I'm sorry, I missed.
You missed what I said?
Yeah, I missed part of what you said.
Okay.
I was walking around.
Oh, okay, no problem. I'll repeat. So I am curious. We have a homeless issue, big homeless crisis, and affordability crisis and all. And we have the shelters that are coming in the works, and that's going to address a lot of, well, some of the homeless issue. However, there's a portion of the homeless that I believe, and I'm thinking maybe the people in this room may concur, that are not being addressed, that are experiencing drug abuse, etc. And I mean, other than being 5150, I don't know how they would get help. And you know, I don't even know if that's the appropriate form of help. I think they need, you know, rehab help and such. And those types of issues create more problems like crime. You know, people on drugs are desperate for money. I mean, I'm not going to make generalizations, but that's what I understand, and you know, steal and whatnot. So I was just wondering, how can we address, the city of Berkeley address that need of homeless population Because I haven't heard this be addressed by anybody, and maybe you already have something already determined to address that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I just came because I'm concerned about staffing, and I've seen changes in my neighborhood in the last 6 months. So I've lived there 20 years. It wasn't a great neighborhood when I moved in, but then it improved a lot. And then the last 6 months, I would say it's reversed, and I feel like there's some correlation to the loss of our bicycle officers. I used to see more patrols in the neighborhood. And of course, we've taken on more as a community with encampments. I live next to a Loney Park, so that's an issue that, you know, it comes with challenges. So I came mostly because I'm concerned about staffing.
Thank you. Any more public comment this time? All right, if there's no more public comment, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from last meeting. Are there any objections to the minutes?
I have a question. I don't know. 9A. My notes show that Commissioner Allenby was the seconder. Maybe she got in a second before I did it.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know.
Do you remember that, Commissioner Ellis?
I could be wrong about that.
Okay.
I think I was.
You think you were? Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was a situation where you kind of both said it, and I think one that you would like, if you think Commissioner Allenby was first, we can make that change.
Okay.
Are there any other changes to the agenda or minutes? All right, if not, do we approve the minutes by general consent? Moving on to my chair's report. I don't have much for this report. Happy Pi Day, everyone. We have a pretty packed agenda, so I'm hoping we can get through a lot today, and we will be going into closed session around 9:30, so just keep that in mind. Now for the PRC's officers report.
You stole my thunder. I was going to say Happy Pi Day. I wanted to provide commissioners with a little more information about the policy complaint that you voted to open at the last meeting. It had been so long that my memory failed me. Ms. Guerra, who filed the policy complaint, we did have a couple conversations, or staff had a couple conversations with her before she filed the complaint. We informed her that if she was not the aggrieved party, she could not file an individual complaint. We advised her that we sent her a late file form with instructions to send it to the complainant or the aggrieved party. That has not come back. Apparently she had already gotten a copy of the complaint form. And I was also wrong that he could not file because of the time limitation. If he is, our regs provide that if a complainant is incapacitated in some way, that is hold the time of filing. We understand from the policy complainant that he was in jail, and then he may still be in Napa State Hospital. We don't know. Staff also spoke to his mother. And so I just wanted to let the commissioners know of all that happened before the policy complaint was filed. Okay.
Can we ask questions about that? I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
Okay.
It sounded like, did you say that she had been misinformed, that she could not file a complaint?
Well, she cannot file an individual complaint claiming police misconduct. So
I'm trying to understand what you were just trying to explain to us.
Well,
I'm not really clear what you're, I don't know.
At the last meeting, I forgot about all these conversations that happened before she filed the policy complaint.
Oh, so you just wanted us to know
So I
that you
wanted
had
you to know
dissuaded
that in
her,
fact,
or informed her that she was unable to be a third-party complainant?
right,
Okay.
right. And that in fact, we told her, she had the complaint forms already for the individual complaint forms. And we mailed her the late file form. And then she got confused and she filed just the late file form. Anyway, so there was more conversation that we had with her before she eventually filed that policy complaint.
I'm sorry, and there's a late file form for a policy complaint?
No, that's for the individual. Well, we wanted, because she was apparently helping him or trying to help him file his complaint, as far as we understood.
So she filled
So
out the
we were
late
trying to
file, had a policy? No, she filed it
No,
out
she
for
just
him.
filed, right, she was trying to file it for him and we had to explain. She could have been confused about the two different kinds of complaints and what the late file, this other thing called the late file form.
So we may still get,
It's possible. So I think I gave you the impression that
individual
it
complaint.
could not be filed, but it is still possible.
So, okay, if we get one, it'll be from him, not from her.
Yes, yes,
Is
yes.
there ever a case where a third-party complaint is acceptable?
Not under our regulations as
Okay.
written.
it used to be.
Aggrieved party.
This body used to take care of
Pardon me?
it. Back in the old days, this
Oh,
PRC.
okay. All right.
Long time.
Last night, the surveillance ordinance was considered by the council, and Commissioner Lippman and I were at the table for almost 3 hours, I don't know. Chief Greenwood was up there for a while. They had a I thought the council had a very robust discussion. They were in the weeds, but I thought there was a lot of thoughtful back and forth about it, and then they eventually passed. Was it first reading? I wasn't even sure.
That was the first reading.
That was first reading, okay.
When you're done, just.
Okay, because at some point they were talking about, could we just see one more cleaned up version? So I wasn't sure.
So, if I may,
Sure.
so it did pass on the first reading, and there'll be another reading, I don't know when that happens, the next meeting, or I guess it has to be scheduled or whatever.
Right.
And I guess that's mostly a formality. It was unanimous, and it was a very interesting conversation. If you watch the last hour or so on the web, there was a lot of ownership of the fact that the notion that there needs to be some control over rampant surveillance in the country. Not saying that we have rampant surveillance here, but this is something that we need to take steps on. And we would be the first city, I'm not sure if it's in the country or the Bay Area, to adopt this. There were a number of changes that were made at that night and over the past couple of months. A number of drafts. It was very confusing. I felt, and I said that I think that the point of what we did came through, and it wasn't, what we were trying to do survived. One thing that changed at the last minute is instead of having all the different departments bring their use policies and their what they're calling acquisition policies to each specific commission that's related to them, like the fire department to the fire commission. They wanted them all to come through the PRC. Now, it might sound like a burden, but I'm not certain that there's going to be that many of these to review. When it happens. But the way it was put was interesting, which is that, there's a lot of commissions that are packed with specialists, like engineers on the waterfront or whatever it was. And one council member said, who's the expert or the specialist on civil liberties? That would be the Police Review Commission. Just nice. And recognition. But that's what they felt like. If you're going to be dealing with the civil liberties and privacy aspects of surveillance equipment, best to be consolidated in one commission. So that was approved. So we'll be seeing some submissions.
Yes, I would agree. That was one of the changes that was made on the floor yesterday, was to send everything through the PRC instead of to other related commissions for different departments. So we'll see how much more work that is for us. And I would just echo Commissioner Littman's observation that while what came out of here was changed somewhat, I would say the main points of the ordinance that was passed remained intact, which was to have some oversight into how surveillance technologies might affect privacy concerns.
A question of George. So the one that passed was what I would call the mayor's version plus the red line that was shown on, there were some adds to what I would call the mayor's version.
The mayor and Councilmember Harrison's version.
Yeah, that's the one that
Yes,
passed.
that was the baseline.
That
The
was
mayor
the
took
base.
out all the commissions in his
Right.
view, and now it's added.
And then put them back in.
Yeah, okay.
Not
Alright.
entirely, not all of our rules.
No, I saw that.
The use policy, but not the acquisition.
Right.
Well, actually, and the reviewing commission, I think, only has 30 days. Is that correct? Did that
Yeah, that's what it said.
stay in there?
That's the way I read it.
Yeah.
30 days.
And I don't think that got changed. So, I don't know if we're gonna have time to set up subcommittees when that happens, or we just have to, scramble. But, we'll see. Yeah, so here's what, I was trying to keep track during the meeting, so there was a lot going on. The fair and impartial policing report was put over to April 24th. And Councilmember Harrison wanted to tie that in. I didn't really understand what she was saying. Did you?
To what?
She made mention of the other, of what council had done.
Council referred, I think, to the city manager, basically the CPE draft report from last year. And gave specific requests for information to come back, and I think gave her a year from September to September. So her feeling was, if we want to give more direction or more requests, let's package it together with that. That's what she's talking about, so that it all comes back at the same time, and to make life easier for her, for the city manager. That was a decision that was made back in September.
So the next response to the report would be coming out in September?
To the CPE report, yes. No vote was taken last night. Nothing happened last night. That was just a comment that she made.
And we're
Okay,
still
right.
working from a draft, right? Like, it's not the final report.
We don't have the final report.
Do we expect that anytime soon?
I'm sorry?
Do we expect that anytime soon?
I think we can ask the chief that when it's time to ask him questions about the CPD. Just want to put on your radar, and I'll agendize it at some point. Juneteenth is coming up. It's June 17th this year, and the question for you is whether you would like to have a table. And along with it is who would like to be at the table on that day, who would like to take turns. I want to let you know the letter to the city manager that you asked to write at the last meeting is in your packet on page 57 regarding the 120-day limit and the standard of proof. And then also on the performance and financial audit, that letter to the council is in the packet, and then my corrected version is handed out. It just corrects the vote. The guts of it is the same. I believe, Chief, you're giving the crime report on March 20th
Yes.
to the council? Okay.
Yes.
I'm on vacation all next week, but things will continue to happen in the office. And then I wanted to talk about a bit about prioritization, because we have, and not to pick on the two new topics that are on the agenda tonight, but anytime that there are new items. You as a group need to figure out how you're gonna fit them into this list of ongoing tasks that you already have. On page 13 of your packet, this is the same list that was in your other packet, but a little bit expanded. Because I added the status of what's going on. So some of these things we're waiting for other things to happen. So they're sort of pending. In the right hand, in the far right column, the reason I put that was just to remind you, you were ranking things on a scale of 1 to 5, and that was the weighted average that came out of your voting when you did the monthly survey. So I guess I'm throwing this out to you to think about. I don't know if I have any particular suggestions. Well, one suggestion I had was if at the time of every new business item you wanted to first prioritize it by voting or just having a discussion about it. I don't know. So I leave you with that. This is food for thought. And I'm done.
Thank you. Now moving on to the chief's report.
Good evening.
Sorry, did you have a question? Sorry.
Are we gonna get to this list later on, right? Discuss it? Let me just ask a quick question here.
Okay, you have a question?
Yeah, number 14, the
Right.
armored van policy. And I understand it was, I'm reading here, done, letter to council 216, February 16th. And I believe that's what we amended. We came up with a substitute motion.
That was, let's see, it's probably in your February 28th packet.
February 28th, okay, I'll look it up.
Uh-huh. Yes, you did amend it.
And did we did amend it, and did that go for a letter to the city council?
That
If it was
letter went-
amended, then what are they gonna do with it? When are they gonna do anything with it?
Maybe we could ask the chief that too.
Okay.
We can move on to the chief's report now.
Okay, good evening. This past weekend, we started our new timesheet, and our staffing continues to be in a real state of crisis. We staff our patrol teams with about 77 to 79 officers, and ideally 16 sergeants, and that gives us coverage across the entire week, all patrol teams. We prioritize that, and so when we're short, we have to leave other jobs open and unfilled. Right now, we're at about 157. We are down 24 officers. If we could get to our overhire authority of 181. That is significantly impacting the organization, continuing to impact the organization, and I don't know that it's going to get better. I think it's going to get a little bit worse. And so what that means from a workaday perspective, as you consider staffing and that topic, patrol is full up, but we will have 3 people retiring within the next month, we anticipate. There are other officers who are concerned maybe seeking employment elsewhere. So that number will just continue to drop. We are at the executive level talking about plans and how to fill and hold it together, and that will include more overtime. That will include having to draw down, at least temporarily, from the few remaining positions that aren't in patrol. We have 3 traffic officers on motors, and we have 4 area coordinators. So there's not anywhere really else to go. I would like the commission to really understand that in our investigations division, we have 24 positions, and 8 of those are currently not filled. 6 are open and unfilled, and 2 are employees are on leave, typically family leave. So our capacity to investigate is impacted by that. We are, of course, working to hire and recruit to the best extent we can. Frustratingly, I have to say, 2 weeks ago, we had 6 people lined up to go to academy, and they just started. However, a week ago, we lost 3 of those people. One person, I believe, had some family issues and just could not be away at academy for 6 months. Another withdrew, at least temporarily, and we're trying to let that person know that we're interested in hiring them once whatever the issue is that they get through. And then one person did not pass the final steps in terms of getting hired, so we had to withdraw the job offer. So where we had 6 for that moment, we have 3 going into academy now. We do have another 3 people in academy. We have 12 people who are out, fully out on injury or leave. So we are dealing with that as best we can. In terms of my activity, the surveillance ordinance and some other business has definitely filled up a good deal of my time in the past couple of weeks as we work towards what I thought was really positive kind of collaboration and discussion, and the outcome now will be shifting some resources and workload, because we're going to have to come up with the acquisition reports and then the surveillance use policies for our various technologies, which are modest, but that's going to take time to write, and we have to get right to it, because once it goes to the second reading, I think it's in a month, and it's on consent, so it'll go into effect in a month, and we'll have to move to meet its requirements. And there are going to be impacts that we don't know citywide, as everybody tries to make sure that we're in compliance with that ordinance. So that all takes time. For me, I expect to interview over 24 people for promotional opportunities. I mentioned that we have a couple people retiring. Captain Allison Hart is retiring. Lieutenant Andrew Radiover is retiring. And that'll mean there'll be a captain promotion, a lieutenant to backfill whoever gets promoted to captain, and a sergeant to backfill there. And with Lieutenant Radiover's departure, that means there'll be another lieutenant and another sergeant. So I'm looking at making 5 promotions by mid-April. And as a result, my next 3 weeks are 100% full with I interview each person. And we have an extensive process to go through with that. So that will be taking my time there. The crime report, so we'll do the crime report for council at a work session next Tuesday. We'd be glad to schedule allowing, which I think it would, but we could come at the next PRC meeting after that. Is there probably when's the next PRC meeting?
28.
I think we could probably do it then.
Okay.
So, and give a condensed version, and we'll get some materials. The report itself, I think, is probably going to get published. If it's not out today, it'll be out tomorrow on the council website. So we'd be glad to do that. Let's see, in terms of just a couple questions, and it's difficult for me to answer every specific question that comes up, but I've never heard of that 74% that you're talking about, completely out of the blue, and I've never heard of
That was from a letter Ms. Dean was sending out on behalf of the SMC, and she had that figure in first, second, and third draft.
I'm taking nothing away from Shirley Dean and BSNC. It's just that number's not familiar to me in any way.
I think it was actually in the Community Services Bureau. Does that make sense? And I do believe that
74%.
I thought he said 75, but when we attended that meeting in the public safety building, that statistic was quoted.
Yeah.
I remember it too, but I think it was just for that one, the Community Services Bureau. It said that they were spending 75% of their time
Yes.
interacting with homeless people and dealing
Well,
with issues
right.
related to
So
homelessness.
the area coordinators end up spending,
I think that's what-
okay, big difference.
It wasn't
So,
the whole
he's
department.
talking about the area coordinators, the 4 officers who work in the Community Services Bureau.
Well,
They do as a
that
group.
that wasn't, I've been trying to respond to drafts of this letter that Ms. Dean is writing in support of the Berkeley Police Department to the City Council. And she has repeatedly used that figure in all 3 drafts of that letter.
That could be.
So whatever she's talking about, those are
She's just- was just
area
clear-
coordinators?
The area coordinators.
I'll email her then.
Yeah, there's a lot of time spent with dealing with encampments and homeless issues there. So that does impact the area coordinators, especially in the Northwest. So that's probably what that's in reference to. Many years ago, Jeff Shannon, who has since retired, had put out a number of 30 or 35% of all of our calls somehow relate to people who are in mental crisis. And I don't know the mixture of that, of actual data behind that versus, and I'm just sharing, I don't know. I don't think, we don't track it like that, so there's definitely not a data source I can go to. It is a substantial issue though, and one of the changing facts of life for, I guess, for Berkeley police officers just doing their work, I've shared with the commission before that we tend to get called when someone's in crisis, and typically it relates to the crisis and often a safety issue. And so we respond and typically resolve that safety issue very rapidly. The problem in my perspective is that we are then part of a system which is extremely troubled. In particular, our officers can spend hours in a day waiting for the ambulance transport, for the person to be transported. That's not a discretionary matter on the officer's part. That's not the officer deciding this is how we're going to run this. The fact of the matter is we respond, we resolve the safety part. Often our mobile crisis workers are working and will come and help. And as the commission should well know, many of our officers have the 40-hour crisis intervention training. Almost all of our officers have the full day crisis intervention training. We've had de-escalation. So we send a very skilled and trained folks to deal with deal with the incident matter, the incident, and then we're stuck waiting for the ambulance. And that is a matter of the county's contract with the ambulance provider and the fact that those ambulances can get pulled for almost anything else. And so one thing that we're starting to look at, I'm talking to the fire chief, Chief Brannigan, but a question might be, should the city contract with an ambulance vendor and get out of this county thing? If we had, and this is just for example, and I'm not saying this with any funding in my pocket or any, but the friction point is, if we had ambulances responding more quickly, our officers would be far less involved. The person whose care we're there for would be getting the care more quickly. Right? They're getting transported for whatever that's worth, and frankly, that's a big question mark as well. But the way it's impacting us now, though, is that our officers spend a lot of time down, not being able to do the other work that they should be doing, and that's problematic. That's because they're waiting for an ambulance. So, from a log this weekend, I saw it was like a 2-hour and 50-minute wait. And so some time ago, we authorized that they could transport a person and just bring them to our parking lot, not put them in our jail, but just bring them to our parking lot so they're out of the public, right? Because if we have people in crisis and it's right out in public, that's a problem. So the ambulance can report there, but the bottom line is that we're losing a lot of time there, and I think in terms of longer-term solutions, that's one that we as a city could be looking at. So I just wanted to kind of get back to you on that number. And let's see, contract negotiations still underway. The contract's been open for quite some time, and it will be good to get that resolved. I think that will help our people in terms of how they're feeling about coming to work. And I think that's it. Oh, I'm sorry, and then just upcoming engagement opportunities. So we're having a coffee with the cop. We had a really nice event at Trieste at San Pablo and Dwight a week or two ago on a Saturday morning. It's the first time we've done it on a weekend morning, which was nice because we sort of got folks turning out who, at a different time of day or available. We have one scheduled for Starbucks on Solano, I think next week on the 20th in the morning, like early morning, 7 to 9:30. I'm pleased that our department's LGBT coordinator, Sergeant Mel Turner, has gotten us together for a meeting, the Berkeley High School LGBT group or association. So I'm looking forward to meeting those folks at Berkeley High in mid-April. And then we will be staffing up Juneteenth with a recruiting booth as well as our normal presence there. So looking forward to that. And I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Just for questions, we're going to stick to our 3-minute rule that we did 2 meetings ago. And I ask that you stick to just questions. So if there are any questions for the chief at this time.
Also, but I would like to talk further about staffing, and I see we're going to talk about that somewhere on 9B. Okay, so I'll wait to ask you more about staffing. Then I had a question of you about staffing and of Sergeant Ross. But body camera rollout.
So we have a pilot group with Apple, just with the iPhones. We're trying to identify the setup working to get the setup for the iPhones locked in before we issue the iPhones out to everybody. That's the current piece I'm holding. I'm just about finished on the policy and the final legal feedback loop on that. But right now, getting the iPhones configured, we've got to identify the configuration, make sure that works and works with the cameras. Then there'll be probably a week where we issue out the iPhones and then do some retraining on the cameras in conjunction with the iPhones to make sure they all work properly together.
So what's your projected date?
I am hoping a month, but I can't control the IT part of it with the iPhones. We really want to get this done. I want to get it done. I know the community does. I know you do.
Okay.
And that I just saw a note also from last week. So have the commission wanted a demonstration for how the iPhones interact with the body-worn cameras? I thought
Yeah, we were
done
trying
it.
to get it. Yes, we were.
So what specifically? Because we talked about it. Did we give you the PowerPoint, or what can I do for you with regards to that?
Well, I know one thing I had, and I know some others had too, but the question really was how they actually interface, what would be retained on the iPhone and what wouldn't be retained. You guys, you wrote up that synopsis about it, and I think I pretty much understand it, but I wanted to make sure that every officer is going to have an iPhone now.
Right.
We had those issues about personal devices and iPhones and all that when we were discussing the policy. And so when these iPhones come in now as part of the system, it kind of puts a different light on what can be done. And so there are going to be photos taken with the iPhone. There can be videos taken with the iPhone. The iPhone can review the tapes, blah, blah, blah. And so we'd like to get a better feel for that. At least I would, I don't know about anybody else. How that works.
We can agendize it. I can give you a general overview kind of verbally in just a couple minutes. Let me just say, I'm cognizant of the time. I can explain in 3 to 5 minutes the basics and how they work.
Yeah, it might be better to have an item itself. At least you could explain it and maybe at one of the other meetings coming up, maybe next meeting or something. That's the way I feel about it. I think we're going to get off track.
I agree.
That's all I have.
Commissioner Sherman had a question?
Yeah, I think Ms. Lee asked me to address this to you, Chief. At our February 28th meeting, we amended, I assume, what we sent to the City Council on February 16th. You familiar with the amendment? On the van policy.
No, we didn't amend the van policy.
No, we amended.
We sent a van policy, which,
Comment.
we received a van policy.
Yeah.
You amended it and
The
sent
question
that
I'm
out.
asking, what happens now? Where
Right, so it's with me. I was actually looking at the annotated note, or the annotated agenda from the van discussion, which said that the mayor and I would come up with a policy and give it to the PRC for review. So I had begun along those lines, and then when I saw that policy coming, I had to clarify, like, what are we supposed to be doing here? So I've checked in with the mayor. We know that the policy needs to be resolved. I think we're both working from the same policy, which is the San Leandro Police Department policy. The most important thing about that is the San Leandro policy is for a Bearcat. It's a green Bearcat with a red cross on it. It is exactly the military-looking vehicle that people were concerned that we're getting. And understanding what that looks like versus our white van that's coming, it's got guards, like it wants a log of every use, and it's got a lot of pieces to it that are totally understandable in the accountability piece for when you're putting that thing out, when you're putting out a Bearcat in the community. Ours is a white van that I will argue is not even noticeable to people. And so I just want to make sure, for example, I want the ability to show ours at community events, like final scroll, not to grow up, but just like here's the van, it's, you know, and that San Leandro policy wouldn't allow for that, for example. So, however, I think a fair amount, and I haven't looked at it for a while, I've been very occupied with the other policies. I don't expect it'll be controversial, but my plan is to look at those two policies, come up with something, and share it with the mayor, and then figure out what the next steps are. The van itself, I think Sergeant Bombi actually traveled up to where it's being built. It's a really large white van with tinted windows and grab bars on the top and some lights, but it doesn't have. It's not that remarkable looking.
We're talking like a van, not a tank or something like that.
Correct, it's not a tank.
A Mercedes Sprinter.
The Mercedes Sprinter van, a tall van.
Yeah, because I didn't have that. I'll be quick. I didn't have that description of it at the time, and I know when it was first presented to us by Chief Meehan, it had my complete support. I mean, he explained it in a way that made sense, so that I had no issues with. And then when it came up here again, it came up with the wording we took out, that the special equipped van may be staged in pre-designated locations. And I had this kind of like Alameda count kind of thing that comes up here, or Haywood comes in, and I just thought that would not be a good way to present the van to the public. But it's not the van, the way you described it, it's not the van that I was envisioning.
Yeah, it's not a Bearcat, it's not a tank, it's a big Mercedes Sprinter van.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lee?
Yeah, just wanted to clarify, when you said, we were talking about body worn cameras, and you said you estimate maybe a month, don't hold me to it, but something like that. Was that the pilot or after the pilot, the full rollout, beginning, ending?
That's a rollout. So the intention is to get, the intention is to go live with it across the department over the course of a few days. The reason getting the iPhone is right, so the reason getting the iPhone is right, the iPhone right is important, is because one of the functions of the iPhone is that it allows for the officer to get a view into their camera. It does not upload the video to the iPhone. It allows them to view the contents of their body-worn camera and tag it, provide it with some information like a case number and the kind of evidence or category that the video needs to be assigned as. So imagine an officer out in the field with the ability to, like, in the course of their processing an incident, then they can go on, through their iPhone, can see the contents of the camera and tag that data. If we don't have that, the officer is going to, either during the day or at the end of the day, go to the station, put it in one of the racks. It's going to have to upload into the system, and the officer will access it via a computer to pull up the video and then provide that same information, which would be a huge time suck. I'm very concerned about officers having downtime coming in at the end of their shift or even during their shift, taking the camera, putting it in, because these racks, you don't have the ability to control how quickly it uploads. And we don't know, because we haven't used it yet, so we don't know if that means, put it in and 2 minutes later it's ready and you can get on the computer and tag the data. We just don't know. What concept with it should allow the officer to more efficiently just process the video.
Just on that, as far as I'm concerned, it all made sense when I read it. I mean, it made a lot of sense efficiently. efficiency-wise. But when we put together the policy, nobody knew that it was gonna be an iPhone involved. So
Okay.
now we're just trying to figure out, make sure there's no chance for abuse in that
Right.
sense.
So the last question I had was the right to watch policy. I think that's also on your desk.
It is, and it's a victim prioritization, sorry, but everything else. So I don't have it yet. I don't know, I do have one more thing, sorry, my notes are a little, it's been a long day. Talking about priorities and kind of the realities, I don't know if you saw on the news, on the front page of the Chronicle a couple days ago, the San Francisco Sheriff's Office allowed a couple of ICE agents to interview prisoners. As a result of the law that was just passed, not SB 54, but it's an assembly bill, there's now a law that says if you allow access, you have to provide waivers. And with the passage of SB 54 and that AB, just to make sure we're totally squared away, because we've relied on the city's sanctuary or city of refuge policy from 2008, I think, and a bit on our jail policy. With the passage of SB 54, I think it's imperative actually that we have a policy that directly addresses SB 54 and those conditions of allowing ICE to interview. What that policy is going to be is, obviously we're in full compliance with SB 54, but I have it up to legal to call the shot, but as I understand it, our city's policy would not allow us to even allow access for ICE. If they showed up at our jail and said, I want to talk to a prisoner, my read is that we would not, the city's policy would not allow that. So on one hand, it may be academic, like we wouldn't get in that territory, but on the other, I need to make sure we have a policy so that it's fully understood and we wouldn't be in violation of law if somehow that happened. So that policy actually is bumped up and pushed a couple other things away in our policy service. And so as soon as I get that drafted, also I'll get that to you folks. So you can take a look.
So, I didn't see the story, I didn't read the Chronicle, I had it on the news. Am I correct in saying the sheriff, Hennessy, I believe it is, in San Francisco? Anyway, the sheriff of the jail has said that the officers acted inappropriately and that they should not have been allowed to.
I don't know, the issue for me is just to understand that, and I apologize if I get the number and the name of the bill, but that assembly bill requires, mandates, that if law enforcement, if in a jail, ICE is allowed access to a prisoner, that agency has to provide the prisoner with a waiver, and I believe they actually have to read it or go over it with them.
Mm-hmm.
And
A waiver for?
A waiver that says to the prisoner, there are ICE agents here who would like to talk to you. You have the right to not talk to them. You have the right to talk to them. You have the right to talk to them with an attorney. But it's a waiver. I was looking at the Fremont policy, which is online. It's very clear. And examples of waivers are given. Then you have the person is to fill out that waiver. And so there's no access until that waiver is filled out and signed by the prisoner.
And it wasn't done in San Francisco.
I understand it wasn't.
No, the sheriffs apologized, but let's be clear, if ICE comes to the Berkeley jail with a federal warrant, with the name of the particular person who is in custody, you have to allow him access, because there's a federal warrant with the name of the person. Nothing in the sanctuary policy of SB 52 precludes anyone from a federal warrant. So if they come to the jail with a federal warrant, with a named person, specifically on arrest, not on retention,
Not a immigration waiver, not an immigration detention.
That's
If
right.
it were a criminal matter,
you have to let him access. So that's why the policy might make sense as well.
Just being confident in time, are there any more questions? Sorry, are there any more questions?
I just have a couple questions. The staffing question, I think, is on a lot of people's minds. And I hear you mentioning that you're expecting 2 to 3 officers to be retiring in the next one. So what do we have? I think I've asked you this question before. I was just wondering if any effort had been made to implement this sort of thing. just sort of a comprehensive, sort of an analysis of departures from the department. You know, so my understanding is that you have done exit interviews with folks who have left the department.
For exit interviews to anyone who leaves.
So what I'm wondering is if there's a way that we could look at statistically how many officers are leaving to take advantage of retirement. I also think that with the city in arbitration, I'm sorry, not arbitration, but negotiation with the Berkeley Police Officers Association, it seems like that information would be useful to them. To understand if we've created a retirement system that acts as an incentive to leave.
No.
With all respect, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure that it's crazy to wonder.
If you could talk to police officers and find out why they're leaving, I talked to a bunch of them.
In my
I'm gonna
language,
ask
that's
that-
exactly what I just said.
I'm gonna ask that we have no back and forth, just questions to the chief.
So I don't mind looking at the numbers, and I think I could bring you numbers that say, hey, here's say
Yeah,
X
for the
number.
last couple of years.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think I could be able to tell you, 20 people left last year, whatever the number is. X were retirements, and we
That's
understand they're retired and left.
That's right.
And X or Y is people who retired, went to another job, or left before retirement to another job. I think I can find that information.
That would be wonderful, just to look at those categories, because I think I've also heard here that some officers were unhappy with the choice of assignments, or that the access to particular types of
They're
training.
unhappy because staffing is so low, we are having to suspend, reduce, or eliminate the special assignment jobs that give people something aside from patrol work to do. That's what it is.
I'm just trying to recall what I thought I had heard here
Okay.
before, that I thought I heard it at a public safety meeting when Chris Steins was talking, that he was saying that some officers would like to have access to particular kinds of training and particular kinds of units and assignments that they may not be able to get here.
I didn't, I can't speak for Chris Steins, he's the president of the Berkeley Police Association, but what I can say is that from a perspective of an officer who's working here, when you are fully staffed, you may be working patrol, but there are other things you can do. You could work in narcotics, you could work on a bike patrol,
That's right.
you could work on a motorcycle, you could work in Community Services Bureau, these special assignments, we call them special assignments. And that the reality is that with staffing having gone down so low, we have to leave those open. That means fewer opportunities, there's fewer opportunities for people to work in those special assignments, and I think it's I mean, I understand for my people that it's demoralizing, because it feels like, hey, my prospects of doing some other aspect of this work that I want to do are now dimmed, and it's a struggle to come to work every day to do that, and that has to do with, and I guess that's it.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
You said it better, because you're the chief. And I also am asking you this. You mentioned that 8 investigators, we're down 8 investigators.
Right.
My question is, have you done any analysis or inquiry about how to outsource any of those jobs, just like we were talking about mental health? Investigators, whether private investigators or other investigators, assistants from other quarters. So in order to relieve the stress on the patrol officers, to provide them with some of that leeway, have you considered, or is it possible to look at outsourcing, trying to take advantage of civilian sources of labor that might be able to take up to relieve some of the pressure on the officers in the department?
No, I haven't. I don't think such positions exist. When you talk to chiefs from across the county on the region, nobody. You need your officers with their peace officer powers acting as investigators. An investigator, by almost definition, is going to be somebody with a greater level of experience and a greater level of training. I've not heard of anybody who's bringing in some sort of outsourcing for that kind of resource.
Can I just direct your attention? There's I think the audit is in the packet. Is the audit in the packet? No, maybe not.
this packet.
Maybe I can send it to you. There's an audit from 2002 that was done, maybe you're aware of it. That
Go
was
ahead.
looking at basically civilianizing 5 different areas of
That audit could not possibly have been talking about civilianizing a sex crimes detective or a narcotics detective. There's no way that audit says that.
Correct. It
We
was-
certainly have civilianized different positions. I mean, we certainly have civilianized different positions.
Tell you what, I sent you the audit, and then I don't wanna speak
Point of
things I don't
order,
know.
this is on our agenda tonight, why don't we defer this to that point?
Just asking to see if you had an opportunity to look at those things. I'll send you the audit, and we can
All right.
pick up the conversation from there.
Are there any other questions for the chief? All right, we can now move on to the subcommittee reports. Thank you, chief.
Thank you.
The general orders subcommittee? Sorry, general orders.
Okay, yes. I think we could do this by doing this consent. Let me just refresh everybody's memory. According to the Commissioner's Manual, all subcommittees are temporary committees. They expire after a year unless they're renewed. So we should, this subcommittee was last renewed on March 22nd, so we should be renewed at this meeting. And perhaps Chair, if you could make a motion and ask if there's general consent on it.
Are there any objections to renewing the subcommittee? And if not, can we renew it by general consent? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think the next meeting, this subcommittee consists of Commissioners Lippman and Pritchett. They're available Thursday, March 22nd. I'm not sure what time you wanted to have that available.
Oh, wow.
You're not free anymore?
Sorry, I didn't realize that was a date.
Oh,
I didn't realize
we
that
had
we
an
didn't
email
have that.
thing. Okay, I'll just,
It's not good.
It has become not good.
okay, I'll do another
We're
poll.
scheduling. Do you wanna ask for other members?
Oh, is anybody else interested in being on this subcommittee? It is tasked currently with reviewing the Commander's Guide for crowd control and crowd management. That was sort of the last piece of what came out of the post-December 2014 incident review. The crowd control general order C-64 and then parts of U2 were updated as a result of that review. The crowd management guide was not released until much later. Then as a result of the settlement of the lawsuit related to that event, there were a couple other tweaks to both C-64 and U2. So those changes were referred to this subcommittee for review. So that's their charge.
Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to join the subcommittee?
It may be doable. Okay.
We'll work out a time.
Okay.
Okay, homeless encampment subcommittee?
We're in hopeless doodle land.
Did you see the last?
Yeah, I did.
The last email?
I said the last doodle and none of the dates were lining up for us.
Okay, but there are,
And there was a month worth of dates there.
okay, there was an email from one of the homeless commission members who said they might be appointing
A couple more.
a couple more
positions,
members.
Yeah.
So I guess we just might have to start the process.
Does that mean we have to start a new doodle?
You might, especially, and
New
if,
Doodle.
New survey, new poll.
and if the dates aren't lining up. You know, if you're not all available, then you're just gonna have to start over to find a date. I don't know what else to do.
Information here, at one point, in helping this guy, I'm kind of new to this subcommittee. At one point, it looked like we we would schedule homework to do for the next meeting about a draft we had in front of us, and we get to the next meeting and the city council had redone the draft and they'd redone the redone draft, and we always seem to be one step behind. And I got the impression that after our last meeting, it was coming down to almost a stretch run with the city council. That they had pretty much, I'm just speculating, that's what I thought, that they were in the final stages of putting something together, and we were waiting to see it, and then we were going to respond. Is that all out the window now?
It might be helpful, Ms. Lee, it might be helpful to, not that the city government really communicates with us, but if they did, it would be nice to have them at least indicate which policy they were following. Because at this point, with the Subcommittee on Homeless Encampments has to examine the February 8th raid of the homeless encampment that took place outside of City Hall. Sadly, the same issues that caused the subcommittee to be created were all recreated that morning on February 8th. And at this point, though, it is bedazzling. It's nobody can figure out what policy is actually being followed that governs or guides the work.
What is being proposed even? Am I right there?
But there was an ad hoc subcommittee on homeless encampments. So Ms. Lee, if you'd be willing or able to follow up with the mayor's office and ask them what are the minutes or what is the last agreement they had as to what policy would guide the dissolution of homeless encampments.
You've not been able to.
I don't know. I mean, I could write to the mayor, but I haven't been able to locate any written policy. I don't know where I mean, maybe are there minutes on
Okay. I can see what I can find out.
All right, and likewise, I will too, but it's odd because it's hard. I can't tell which one takes. There was the city manager's office has an administrative guideline for homeless encampments. The police department has their own policies that they're following. There was an interagency, the work of dissolving that homeless encampment was a multi-agency effort. Sadly, I submitted a Public Records Act request, but I was denied information. I was not able to get an after-action report, and so I can't understand what governs their actions at this point.
So do you need a motion for that, or?
A motion, well, you mean for
For you to look into
for
that
me to,
question?
I mean, I'll take that as a very informal request. And it's not asking me to do a lot of work, so.
Okay, if we're done with that subcommittee report, we can move on to number 9A, continuing our discussion of the ballot measures. And I believe if you turn to page 15, the measures are on the packet. Is there anybody who would like to start this discussion? Yes, Commissioner Ellis.
So I read through it, and I'm still not quite sure who's behind it and who participated in let's see, what do they call themselves, or the name for the group? And I understand it's been filed. This has been filed with the clerk, I presume. So right now, there's no modification to it. It's been filed. So, in terms of that, I'm not sure what the commission could do about anything at this point, other than maybe take a position on that that's been filed, or develop our own. But personally, just kind of a summary of some of the things I saw. And there are a lot of holes in it, I think. You know, we know that things need to be changed. And we've asked for that several times about the time constraints and the transparency and the standard of proof and you know, that kind of thing. We know that needs to be done. But it seems like, to me, if you look at our department and its activities, I mean, we're not Oakland, and we're not San Francisco, and we're not Baltimore, and we're not Chicago. And so this kind of acts like we are. I'm not sure what part of Oakland's went in here and what didn't. But basically, it looks like it's an overreaction and an overloading of a new system on that is applies to departments that have much more egregious problems than we do. It adds staff. It has a lot of staff. It adds, you know, and with the bureaucracy that comes along with it. Again, it creates a new bureaucracy. The appointments, I don't think, are accountable in a way to elected members. They're not elected. They're not even appointed by elected members. They're appointed by appointments of elected members. And they basically are only accountable to themselves, because once they're rolling, the only way a commissioner can be removed is by the rest of the commission. And so it's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the way I read it. So those are my thoughts about it. We know changes need to be made, but to me it goes far beyond what we need in Berkeley. Just a couple other comments on it. It isn't clear who the chief reports to. The commission, the city manager, or the mayor. It talks around it a lot, but it's really not clear. And it's not clear who evaluates the chief and based on what. The other thing, the other area that I had concerns about were the disciplinary actions on page 29 through 31. And you know, if you haven't, take a look at those. And it ends up with let's see if I can recall this. There's a commission recommendation for discipline. Then that goes to the chief. And if the chief disagrees with that, then it goes to a three commissioner membership disciplinary committee, which is the tiebreaker. Was kind of like, you know, they already did that. The commission already voted on that, and yet now they're going to send 3 more members to be the tiebreaker. So it's not really a third party kind of thing. So I see there's problems with that. I won't go through all of the stuff. It is not clear what role the city manager would play in that. It's also not clear on what non-complaint disciplinary actions how that would be handled. This focuses on, in our BOI process, focuses on complaint-driven disciplinary action. And so, you know, you have to look at the department as a whole. And so they're giving disciplinary actions on various things. There has to be some consistency in there. And this basically addresses complaint-driven. So you could have a complaint-driven disciplinary action that the commission's controlling over here in some way, and the chief's controlling a non-complaint disciplinary action over here, and they end up different, which doesn't bode well, I think, in the scheme of things for either officers, the department, the city, and for consistency, that kind of thing. And then just two more points. One is on liability and accountability for decisions and policies. This gives the commission pretty much the authority over policies and disciplinary action. It's, again, it's not appointed by the council, they're not elected, and all of a sudden they're making these policies which could really put the city as liable, and may put commissioners as liable. I don't know. We should find that out. But for example, if commissioners are making decisions based on what I would call let's see, what would you call it? Traditional practices. For example, if we outlaw pepper spray, if we don't allow non-lethal, and officers or the public gets hurt because of it, and whatever it is, are we, or the liability? Yeah. And so I think we should look into those things. Then it just one piece of it really, I think, really brought it home for me, and that is on page 17, on item 9. And just read those first two paragraphs. It says, all policies and procedures of the police department shall be subject to approval of the commission. In addition, the commission may regulate practices of the BPD where appropriate and consistent with the state and federal law and U.S. And California Constitution. But the next paragraph is, I think, is the most important. The commission shall have the power to review and modify all written and unwritten policies, practices, procedures of whatever kind and without limitation in relation to Berkeley Police Department, including its relationships with other law enforcement agencies and intelligence and military agencies operating within the city of Berkeley and law enforcement generally. Well, that's quite a big responsibility, because this could, again, be, our city council may have one view of a policy, could be the ICE policy, for example, right? What happened with ICE? And so our elected city council has a view of what we should be doing politically with ICE, yet our unelected commission has the control over what would be done with ICE. And so that paragraph right there can have conflicts all over the place between the elected council and the police commission. And wait a minute, just one other thing here. I guess I do have other points, but I think I'll leave it at that for other people to weigh in. That's kind of my thoughts.
All right, do we have anyone else that would like to speak?
Wow.
No. All right.
I can try to speak to I mean, I can talk about my impressions of it as one member of the coalition, and go through some of your points. So the first question was, who is this? And I mentioned
Who, what? Oh, yeah.
who's
yeah,
behind
yeah,
it. So there is a coalition that's been working on this for a while. Among the original groups, as I mentioned before, was the ACLU and the NAACP. It's also got support from the American Friends Service Committee, East Bay Community Law Center, and a number of other community organizations And nonprofits and political clubs are in process of coming to an endorsement, as well as several members of the city council are endorsing it.
Can I ask a clarification? Is that ACLU California or just a branch here in Berkeley?
The ACLU of Berkeley is participating.
Okay, so no California or national ACLU.
But I'm not saying that they made an official endorsement. They're
Oh,
working
okay.
within it, they're part of initiating it,
That's important.
and their endorsement is pending.
Okay, that's important. Thank you.
They have to go through
So no California ACLU or national ACLU. Okay, thank you.
not yet.
Or no national NAACP or California NAACP. Just a branch of
Have officially endorsed.
church by the site, right? Great.
They're working.
That's
with it.
important.
Mhm.
For the record, it's important.
So those endorsements should be coming soon. So, it is, so this was a community group that proposed this. Sometimes change happens from within the system, within the government, sometimes it bubbles up from below.
Sure.
That's what's happening in this case. And, I think they presented it, to the commission for the group's, interest and a possible endorsement, but that's the decision of the commission to make. And I don't think that there was, I haven't seen a lot of upwelling of interest in the commission writing its own, so this is what there is. So yes, it is a major change, you're correct. The power that it has in this proposal is, I think, similar to say, San Francisco, where there's a police commission that is responsible over the police department. I would say that it's not true that they're not appointed by the city council. They are appointed by the city council. There's a proposal that's made by the selection panel, which is appointed by the city council. And then that comes back to the city council for approval. So there's that accountability. So yes, they're not elected, but they are appointed. And I think it's seen as an independent department of the city, more independent than this review board is, and not accountable to the city manager. And the way that the discipline is intended to work is that the internal affairs would still exist, internal affairs division of the department, and that the commission would be at liberty to say which cases it wanted to work on, which internal investigations or disciplinary proceedings it wanted to take. But this would not preclude the department from doing its own internal investigation as well. And the department and IA would maintain responsibility for those cases that the police commission did not take on. So there's a shared responsibility.
This is California law. California law requires that internal investigations have to happen with the police departments per the police officers' bill of rights. Not because, so for the record, that we need to be clear with that explanation. We're not allowing them to have it. California law requires that internal affairs investigation happen within the department as prescribed by California law. So just for the record.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I will say that there is another initiative that's also circulating. And when you see that other initiative, I think if this surprises you, you'll be startled by that one. The other one declares that all police officers are at-will employees and may be terminated by what they're calling the Police Accountability Board. And they would have the sole responsibility for discipline and removal of officers. So that, I think, is the really very stringent proposal. I find this proposal to be moderate in comparison to the other.
Yeah, I don't think that would pass.
I don't think it would be
I don't know if this one will.
Yeah.
It will put the city of Berkeley in default of the labor associations, and that will be a lawsuit. And then we'll have to compensate each police officer and dissolve all the labor union contracts, which is a much different perspective, which will not be upheld by the California Supreme Court, for the record. I have a question for the chair, because I heard the vice chair make a statement. There doesn't seem to be an interest in crafting the proposal from the PRC. Has the PRC said that on the record?
We did have a conversation about it. I don't believe you were here at that meeting.
But so let me rephrase this. Has the PRC made a motion on the record that saying that stipulating or sending a letter to the city council is stipulating that, to quote, there is no interest in crafting a proposal from the PRC? Oh, okay. That's much different. So I like that question answered.
So I thought you got the answer. What was the question?
So you have, the chair or the vice chair have not made a motion to send a letter to city council expressing that the PRC has no interest in crafting the proposal.
No, so I think what Commissioner Liquid was talking about was that we had a discussion and we asked how we would like to move forward with this process and if we would like to create our own ballot measure or wait for the community ballot measure to come to us. And the consensus from the commission was that we didn't have time to craft our own complete ballot measure, so that we should wait for the community ballot measure to come to us. But there was no talk of sending anything to the council.
So in effect, the PRC has abdicated responsibilities to create a proposal to the city council in terms of changes to the PRC? If that is not the case, has there been a vote to send a letter to the city council informing city council that the PRC is not going to go against a referral by city council and is going to wait until the community makes proposals instead of creating one of their own? Has that letter been sent to city council?
So I think that's something that we can discuss right now, because the city council's recommendation was for us to review next steps, including a ballot measure. So one way that we had kind of interpreted that is that we can send a letter to city council letting them know that we have reviewed the community's ballot measure and these are our thoughts on it.
But wouldn't it be fair to say that the moment that the discussion on the PRC happened, choosing to default to a community interest in community proposal, shouldn't that have been the time in which city council should have been informed of the process that the PRC was going to be involved in? Because if now you're saying that we waited for the proposal from the community to take place, and now we're informing city council that we chose to wait for the proposal to happen and the review, and that's what we're doing, that sounds to me not very well done.
I think Commissioner Sherman had a response to that.
Correct, this whole thing came up when you weren't here, and this discussion came up about a ballot initiative was out there, and Commission, Mayor was very concerned about who was behind it, what does it say, we haven't seen it, it was all done in secret, we can repeat our own language here, and I just think we decided, informally without any vote or anything, well, let's wait and see, get a copy of the ballot initiative, find out who's reported, which we have now in our packet, discuss it and see where we go from here.
Oh, I'm not necessarily questioning the decision. I am questioning it, but I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on where is it that we have informed the city council that was the process we're going to take, and that we have decided not to create a subcommittee.
No, we haven't decided one way or the other.
Oh, okay.
We haven't decided.
So we haven't decided.
This is the first step, George.
Oh, the first step is to not create a subcommittee.
No. First step is to just look at this, read this, and discuss and see where we go from here.
So the commission decided not to start a subcommittee to look at the proposals that are coming from the community and then work on the possibility of creating their own draft. They decided just to wait for proposals before taking any action whatsoever, and city council has not been informed of that. If that's the answer, then I'm okay with that. If that's your point of action, then that's your action. Okay. I just want to make sure the record, for that was on the record. That's the action. No subcommittee, wait for the community proposal, and investigate it that way, and then make a decision, and then inform city council.
So this has
Yes,
just,
that's
yeah,
a little more.
it's been like an ongoing process. We've been on the same agenda item for the past 3 meetings. So we are now still discussing the same agenda, and we have new information that should be guiding
The
our
point should
decision
be
on.
made also, the point should be made, this has been filed with the city clerk. I get, the city is gonna vote on it. The question is, what do we wanna do with it? I mean, we can't unfile it, we can't change the wording of it. That's where we are right now.
It's just concerning that the vice chair says that on the record, that he's part of the group of the people that generated this proposal, but yet the vice chair is not engaged in creating a proposal within the commission to create those changes. It is really disconcerting, but the majority has ruled, this is your step.
Majority
and
did
now
not
this is
vote.
So,
Well,
Go
the
ahead,
majority
Ruben.
ruled. We didn't know anything about this report.
okay, so I'll let the process play.
We're just as surprised as you are.
Thank you, ma'am.
Commissioner Pritchett.
Well, I just like to remind folks that, we got, I guess, referral to the Police Review Commission to write a charter amendment ballot measure came from the city council, gosh, when was that?
November 14th.
November 14th, okay. So, so to be honest, I mean, the wheels of governance grind awfully slowly. And so at the rate that our subcommittees operate, I think we all kind of know that sometimes the process can bog right down.
This should be a priority though.
Sometimes,
That's 6 meetings though, y'all.
you know, yeah. And I've seen subcommittees apparently that go on for years and they have trouble getting their folks together. So a colossal task like writing a ballot measure, I'm grateful that the ballot measure was not written in a subcommittee of the PRC, because I frankly think it would have taken way longer, and there's actually deadlines that happen. So good, bad, or ugly, I mean, let's look at the actual ballot measure and decide if we like it, and let's debate it, and decide whether we want to add our name to it or not. We sent a letter, Ms. Lee, and you probably helped me about the encouraging preponderance of the evidence and to change the 120-day limit.
Yes.
And we sent that, was that last meeting? 2 meetings
Yeah,
ago?
and it's in this packet.
So I appreciate the fact that we're trying to mitigate some of the impact of some of the shortcomings of this current structure. I think that's a good way to go. I think it begins to address some of the problems with this Police Review Commission. But I'm glad folks in the community, I'm throwing down, I want to support the ballot measure. I want to support it happening. And I want to support a community-wide conversation about police oversight. Because, you know, every week that I'm here, every meeting that I come to, I'm reminded of how absolutely powerless we are. We can't even get an after-action report. I can't get one. You know, the things that seem really basic to providing informed oversight, we're not able to do. That our regulations and the rules so hinder, so hamper, just completely block the notion of transparency. So we might as well change the structure of what's happening here and ask, at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, have we impacted police functioning? Does this Police Review Commission really impact police functioning? I think we do. I'm not seeing it. So that's, excuse me, Commissioner, with respect, let me just finish.
Oh, I'm not going to go against anything you're saying.
I appreciate it. Just give me that little minute. So I understand that people may not like the way that it's been introduced here. They may not like the way that, and I tell you, what I can see is it's a volunteer effort. That there's no grand plan. It's sort of haphazard and catch as catch can, really. Frankly, I wish it was otherwise. I wish there was some great machine that was supporting this and stuff, but there's not. There's us. And so let's look at this ballot measure. And I think that, yeah, there's shortcomings, but the question is, you know, we have like until what? On March 27th, the city council is going to look at this and decide whether or not they want to support it. And decide whether or not they want to put it on the ballot. Doesn't mean that they actually even support it. It means that they believe that it should be considered by the people of Berkeley. And it's been a long time since we've had a citywide conversation about police oversight. It doesn't mean you hate the police. It means you're engaged in what kind of policing you want. And that you say that the people of the city should have a hand in crafting that. And I believe we should. And I believe we should control the police. And so this is a vehicle. Maybe it was, you know, if by some miracle of miracles it actually is passed, there's still opportunities to change it. There's still opportunities. And I also want to remind folks of this, that when the original Police Review Commission ordinance was voted into existence in 1973, it was 11 years before a police officer ever showed up to a board of inquiry. For 11 years it was in the court. So yeah, I think we all know the nature of what's happening here, that there will be resistance. And so we have to keep our eyes on the prize. What do we want to have happen? What role do we want the community to have in describing and defining and shaping the culture of the police department?
And that you subverted the discussion.
You're elected. You know, the reason why I haven't been present is just to nail this down. You know, don't give up your power because you're in another group creating something as out of the PRC. The reason why I have not been here is because I've been working on 50 changes to the Park Police Department. So I didn't have to take my responsibility to change the Park Police Department for progressive policing. As a group with 11 people that meet once a month for only 2 hours. So if this commission is considering not creating a subcommittee to engage in the work of changing the dynamic that you so well put right now in your speech, create a subcommittee and get to work. Because I did for the last 3 months and passed 50 changes that are sweeping for a police department who's more impactful in 5 counties than the city of Berkeley is. So don't subjugate your responsibility to someone else and mask it by saying that it's easier. Do the work, engage it, move to create a subcommittee, do it now.
Commissioner Sherman.
Yeah, doing my best to control a sense of anger here. For a fellow commissioner who's new to this commission, who has not especially been on the best of terms with Berkeley Police Department, to say that this commission, since its existence, with all the members, very honorable people that have served on this commission since its forming, and have worked intensively with any number of police chiefs on policies and procedures and culture, to say that this commission is, as described by the person on my right here, a helpless, whatever the hell she referred to, is an insult to every member on this commission, and it's an insult to this commission as it was formed, and it's an insult to the commission, all the commissioners that have served here and have worked very, very hard, and have gone on to even higher things, having left this commission out of respect. Mr. Perez Velez here and Richard Bloom, who were chairs. So, you know, that's a sidebar. We can discuss this item, but I'm not going to buy this bullshit that this commission has been a helpless, wandering elephant in the woods here of Berkeley Police Department. I just find it really insulting.
I would hope to move this off of the personal tone this whole thing is taking. I would say constructively, if there are 3 people who want to work on a proposal, I'd be one of them. But there has to be the energy to do it.
If I could address that directly, real quick. A question. You suggesting we form a subcommittee to come up with a counter ballot initiative? That's a question to you. Is that what you're suggesting to form the subcommittee for? And the reason I ask that, George, to come up with a ballot initiative with all the issues, many of which address in here, but with all the issues of liability and legality and everything else, is a humongous, tremendous task which would call for a lot of outside support. And I don't know, time-wise.
You got a template now, though, Michael. You have a template. You can change that template to make it a better template.
Another template, sorry to interrupt, is the PRC mandate, which the basic problem with the PRC mandate is that it was an ordinance, not a charter amendment. And therefore all the strength of it was thrown out by the courts.
Yeah, that's another.
You know, maybe the council would support that. I mean, you know, I'm fine with this, but I'm just saying if people want to do it, then people have to, you know, put their
It
hands.
a lot of time.
Well, that one there that I just said, that would be a 2-word change.
What?
Taking the PRC mandate, making it a charter.
Oh, okay. That's
But you know, there has to be, like, people can criticize this. You can criticize the process, fair enough. You can find things you don't agree with, but there have to be people here who say, what matters is not so much our feelings or even our process, but doing the great work to make this a better, stronger oversight body. So if people want to talk about that, I'm interested, but not in any of the other stuff right now.
I just have one specific question and then bigger picture. Back to who the police chief reports to. Can you show me in here who the police chief reports to and who does the police chief's evaluation?
Well, I can say that, I have to read through, but I can say this.
I could not find that anywhere.
I'll say one, first of all, I'll say,
I mean, that's a pretty key question.
I will say this first. The person who is responsible for removing the chief is not the commission, but it's the mayor with
The mayor, I understand that.
So
That's not the
number one.
point. I'm talking about every day. Not the culmination of whatever I'm talking about. You know, if you're employed by somebody, you report to somebody, they do your evaluation, you get feedback. If you don't know that, that's fine, it's okay, but I didn't see it in here, and it's really a critical thing.
I'm sure it's in here, and,
If I may, if we're gonna be going through this, we should probably figure out the process that we're gonna take with this. I did have a few things that I wanted to say.
Before you go there, let me just, that was one question. On the bigger picture. Well, another detail question. Andrea said this is going to the council on the 27th of March.
one member of the council has put it on the agenda. So that's the first time it'll be on there. Knowing the council, they may or may not take it up.
What's the date?
Yeah, and so, but there are deadlines for the ballot and all that. We just have to realize that for whatever course we take.
Yes.
Because we have a certain time frame, and I don't know what that time frame is. To me, it would be, if we don't either construct something or at least give detailed comments on this one, we would abdicate our responsibility to the city by not giving the council our advice, I think. So we need to do something with respect to either using this as a template possibly and modifying it, or at least giving them the pros and cons in some way that we see about the measure. And, then again, it comes back to the timing. Well, I'm not sure between now and March 27th, we're gonna have, even if we work 24/7, we'd have all that done by the 27th. So we'd have to set some timeframes on that if that's what we were going to do. But I do believe we should take some kind of position one way or the other on this issue.
It goes on the 20. For either one of both, if it goes to the 27th on the council, assume they're not gonna take a yes or no vote or support on it then. I imagine that that'll be in the council agenda for some time to come before they decide on it. And they can decide the last meeting of the city council before the election.
Yeah.
So I think
Well, we just need to find out
a little more
what
time than
timeframe
the
will be.
27th
Yeah.
to do it.
So what I had wanted to say was that last meeting I was concerned with everybody's process questions. It honestly had not occurred to me that when you file a ballot measure, it can't be changed afterwards, and that's 100% my fault for not realizing that. And I wanted to say that I definitely do believe that the PRC should have input, and I apologize that I didn't advocate for you all sooner as chair. With that, I would like to make a motion that we create a subcommittee that looks over this and recommends to council what we like and what we don't like, and how we create our own amended version that we would like council to take up.
Awesome, if we so desire.
If the subcommittee desires.
I'll second that.
Okay, let's be sure, what were you saying there? So we would review and comment, and then what was the last
So
part?
review this proposal, decide our next actions, including
A possible counter proposal.
a possible counter proposal or recommendations to council for their discussion on this proposal. If anyone has anything to
Quick
add.
question, if we submit it, is there a deadline for submitting ballot proposals? When is it? I know there's a deadline, when is it?
The deadline is, deadline for the city council to put it on the ballot is the end of July.
Okay.
Essentially the end of July. Their last meeting before August is July, late July.
So we have time.
But, yeah, so they, if they decide to do it by then, they could do it.
Okay.
Or the alternate way is to gather the signatures, which time is getting very short for that. To put together the machinery to do that.
Yeah, that would be July 24th. So they don't meet on the 31st.
Is there any more discussion on the motion for report?
It's to form a subcommittee with,
Yes.
Is it possible to,
I just want to check, is the mission of the subcommittee just to examine this proposal, or is it to sort of refer back to the city council's, whatever, their November directive that says direct the city manager to provide a legal analysis of which proposals can be completed legislatively and which require amendments to the city charter, changes the city manager and PRC should consider, but not be limited to, include the following, the previous recommendations from the PRC, but also is that the guiding document? It says that we work with the city manager, full analysis by the city manager and PRC must be reported to the city council by May 2018. Is that the charge of this subcommittee, or is it to look at this, or is it to look at this as part of that?
So my motion was the ballot measure, but I would be happy to add that as a way to consider those and work with the city manager, but the end result being a ballot measure or changes to this ballot measure.
I think you could have to add that because we are asked by the city council to do that. We've been asked.
Well, so I'm just trying to
We
get,
can't just ignore that.
is the subcommittee, is the charge of the subcommittee to respond to this directive from the city council and use this ballot measure as one possible response, but to create the communication with the city council?
Yes.
so if the major issue here is, are we including the short term as well as the long term? I think that the more we load on this thing, the more we doom it to failure. So I would say the charge to the commission is to look at all of the above. But that's not necessarily the charge to the subcommittee that we create. I would try to keep it as tight as possible because we really very little time. I also wanted to ask,
Somebody ought to create some language then.
well, I think you had it. I mean, I think yours was fine. I wouldn't put anything in about the short term. I wouldn't worry about their charge to us. We'll deal with all of it.
If they confluence, they confluence.
If only, whatever, I mean, they're just saying, here's some things to talk about. We're not in trouble if we don't do all of it. I would suggest, I think your language is fine. I think, I would suggest if it's possible to see if there are going to be volunteers for this before we vote. Because if we create a subcommittee, nobody wants to be on it, then it's pointless.
George, you said yes. This George said yes, and I will volunteer.
Is that right?
Can I just see a show of hands?
I'll be on it.
Yeah, that's 4.
Okay.
Can you have fun? Can you have fun?
No.
Well, since you're already working on the one from the outside, maybe you can recluse yourself, and Alan B., Roberts, Sherman, and I can participate. Since you're already working on the one from the outside.
Sorry, Ms. Lee, is there a process for if we have?
You appoint the subcommittee members, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't, it feels like Commissioner Lippman would have to be on it because he has such a hand in creating this one that it just seems reinventing the wheel. So I would strongly advocate Commissioner Lippman to be on that committee.
I would advocate against it because it might be precluding his opinions that will be based on the fact that we participated in the original document. And if we're going to review it and assess it from an impartial outside look, the person who took a part on it should not participate on it. He can certainly participate when it's brought over to the commission on the full vote, which will have to be brought to the commission for a full vote before it goes out of, once it goes out of subcommittee, it goes to city council. He can certainly participate at that time
That
with his
sounds
changes.
fun, but are we really precluding expertise? Is that what's happening?
Okay. He already had a hand in the kitty.
Yeah. As a practical matter though, we are gonna, the subcommittee will come back to the commission, so we gotta crank that. I'm in there. And as a practical matter, I'm not still quite sure what your motion says about this, but as a practical matter, we're not gonna probably develop something from scratch. And as a practical matter, we might, as I see it, we might be able to take this and see if we can agree on some changes that we could support as a commission, possibly. But past that, it's going to be the commission's going to send up some kind of communication to the council that might say, we've got a majority and minority opinions, or we suggest that you consider these items as pros and cons or something like that, to fashion something to give something back to them. I mean, that's about the best we're going to be able to do, one of those options. So, I mean, I think we just need to be clear about that, and we'd have to do it by the time that we could get it back to the commission. The commission could vote on it and then move it forward.
I don't quite see it the same way. We have a ballot initiative in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
We can just take the simple route tonight and say we urge the city council to vote no, or yes, or abstain maybe, I don't know. Or we can do the process that you suggest, I think, what you were talking about, but then we will have to be presenting essentially an alternative ballot measure.
Or comments on this one.
Comments?
The motion is specific on the directive. The motion has covered your concerns and your concerns. The motion the chair made is very specific on what it is.
Okay.
So
What, you mean the referral?
The motion is to review, make recommendations in favor or in opposition, and the possibility of creating a counter proposal. That's what the motion is. It's very specific. It covers everything.
So, to address Commissioner Pritchard's point, I'd like to make a recommendation. I'm not sure if I have to add this to my motion, but that the subcommittee also meet with members who created this ballot initiative so that the subcommittee members can get a full understanding of the reasoning behind your concerns for it.
That'd be perfect.
Okay.
The subcommittee members can't meet with commission members, they could meet with other people who were involved in drafting the ballot measure. But if the subcommittee is gonna have 4 members, then it cannot have a meeting with a 5th member of the commission.
But other community members.
But it could meet,
Okay.
sure.
So I'd like to keep that as a,
Are you amending your
yes, I'd like to amend my motion. to
your
have that as
motion?
well.
Okay.
Do you need a second on that?
No, I have the, yeah, of course.
Ms. Lee, do you mind reading back? your motion?
I was just gonna ask, I'm not sure, I'm not confident that I have the whole thing. So it's a motion to create a subcommittee to review the ballot measure. And then there was language about making recommendations about it, or?
Yes, to review the ballot measure, recommend to the city council, give a recommendation to the city council regarding the ballot measure, and consider possibly creating our own initiative.
The wording was counter proposal.
And,
Counter
right,
proposal, yes.
a possible counter proposal
That's right,
is
that's
what
right.
I had
Can we
written.
say alternative?
It's really,
Alternative proposal.
Okay.
it's really giving the commission a recommendation, it isn't giving the council a recommendation.
Giving, okay,
Yeah,
Right.
because
Right.
the
Right.
subcommittee's
I mean-
coming back to the commission.
yes.
The subcommittee will recommend that
Yeah.
full commission make a recommendation to council. Okay, so the motion is to create a subcommittee to review the ballot measure, to make recommendations to the full commission about it. And to possibly propose an alternative.
Proposal, yes.
And develop, how about develop possible alternative proposals?
Chair, would it be proper to say, or explanations on dissent? If something, if there's a dissent on something, why the subcommittee dissents on it?
Yes.
When it comes, so I mean, on recommendations, is there or is it explicit enough to say that the recommendations will also include explanations of dissent on any recommendation? I think
I think it's understood.
that that's
I
fine.
mean, it really won't make sense unless you tell people why. right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last piece that got added was there a last piece?
The subcommittee shall also
Oh.
meet with members from the community who worked on the creation of this measure, to further understand their intent.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to suggest, I don't know if that's go in the wording of it, that people review the, original PRC mandate without the strikeouts, you know, that were imposed by the court, as well as reviewing the coalition proposal.
Will you make a motion to
I
amend
mean,
the original?
I don't know, I mean, I could just suggest that here, or I could go into it, but.
We just put it in the back, so I remember what all material.
He can add, in addition, you know, he can also add to the motion if the chair is,
I
in
would accept
addition.
anything you
Okay.
wanted to add.
Yeah.
Okay, so to review the ballot measure.
So just to review the ballot measure and original PRC mandate.
So,
Yeah.
I did take a look at the mandate, and there's things that really need to be updated in there. I know one way to communicate that would be to, send you a letter to be put into the next meeting's agenda. That would be legal, because it would be public. Is there any other way to do that, like, I guess a member of the subcommittee can write to everybody one time through you? That's legal.
Right, just.
But is that,
Then I can't get any
right,
feedback.
correct. But is there any, does that loophole work for, somebody who's on the commission but is not in the subcommittee?
The member of the commission can send a communique to the subcommittee.
Yeah, is that true?
Yeah, one way
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure.
All right, so I'll send a note to you.
Okay.
Okay, is there any more discussion on the motion? If not, Ms. Lee, would you call roll, please?
Okay, Commissioner Allenby,
Yes.
Lippman,
Yes.
Matthews, Matthews,
Yes.
Perez Velez,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Abstain.
Roberts.
Yeah.
Sherman.
Yeah.
Okay, motion passes.
And do I appoint the members
Yes.
now? Okay, so Commissioner Roberts, Allenby, Sherman, and Perez Velez will be on the subcommittee.
Yeah, just before we leave, I just want in my comments, which I still stand by 95%, I want to exclude the 5% that included a little
Curse word.
huh?
5 words.
The 5 words that, that I, when I was addressing another commissioner on this thing. And I would add that been on this in a while, and I do feel, particularly and especially, and everybody knows this when it comes to boards of inquiry, I share the sense of helplessness and sometimes hopelessness. But I've also been here long enough and worked with so many great people in this department that I stand by everything else that I said. But I do share my colleagues' sense of sometimes despair and hopelessness that we are sometimes knocking up not only a very powerful institution, but state law as well. So I understand the frustration, and I didn't mean to personalize that comment.
Okay.
And one thing on this, it seems like to me we ought to somehow get together and set a meeting like right away, because we don't have any time. And, time's gonna be limited.
10 o'clock tonight?
And
Those can take weeks.
yeah, so maybe right after the meeting. or
That would
something.
violate the Brown Act.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's not scheduled.
Okay, so I will commit to this. I will send out a doodle poll tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to 9B. Again, just cognizant of the time, we're going to go into closed session around 9:30, 9:35. But we can move on to ways to address the BPD staffing shortage. If any commissioners had anything that they wanted to say on this, or if the chief would be all right with us asking
9B.
questions.
Yeah. Your memo's in the packet again, I think,
Yes.
on 9B. So I don't know if you had anything to say about it, but I just had a couple questions of the chief and Sergeant Ross also. Chief, you were talking about before, you were giving the staffing data and all that kind of stuff. The last report we had from, I think it was Lieutenant Pop or something, she was here, I think, the meeting before last or something. She was saying that the recruiting list, the people that were applying, there were pretty good numbers of people applying, and as I recall. And you were talking about the people that gotten through the process, and now we're gotten to go about ready to hire or the academy. Those are pretty small. But I think she said they had a recruiting list of a pretty large number of people. And I'm wondering, well, how that's going to translate, in your opinion, into actually hiring people and when.
So, I don't have the I don't have the numbers of the current recruitment. I want to say we had in the mid 200s.
Yeah,
of
she said there was a
applications.
couple hundred people.
And then when they go through for minimum qualifications, we lost at least 100 off of that.
Right.
And then I can get the breakdown, but what my observation of what happens, because now we're doing like 3 recruitments a year, so HR is really supporting us in doing these processes, not just once a year, but 3 times a year. That we get a large number of people applying, or we've gotten larger and larger number of people applying. And then you go through the minimum qualifications, you lose a lot of people.
Right.
And then they have to actually show up for the physical agility test and the written test.
No, I understand that.
And so the numbers tend to drop.
Out of 100, how many are you going to get, you think? Typical, that are going to qualify and possibly take a job?
If we had 20, that would be a big number.
20 out of 100.
Out of this recruitment.
Oh, out of the 200?
20 at the 250, if we got 20, that would be almost a unusually high number.
Okay.
But I can report those numbers to the commission so you can get an actual sense of that. As you go through the process, you end up with a smaller and smaller group. So they go through, if they show up for the written, they show up for the physical and pass. Then we have oral boards, the oral panels. And from there, some fail that part of the process, and then the feedback from the panelists informs who we bring in.
Yeah, I understand the process, so I mean, I'm just trying to understand what the real urgency is in terms of the fact that we're gonna sort of just run out of candidates and we're gonna be stuck with vacancies. You know, and if we've got a 200 list there and it's gonna come down to 20 possibly, you know, it's still gonna be,
There's still going to
still
be,
a stretch.
this is going to be an ongoing
Okay.
problem that's not going to get solved in this recruitment.
All right. Yeah, because I noticed you have a lot of promotions that you gotta watch out because the people aren't gonna have anybody to supervise. You know what I mean?
That's an issue, so as we look at
Yeah.
whether or not to promote or to hold
Right,
off on promotions,
right.
that's an issue.
And I just had a question of Sergeant Ross about the VPA and kind of what you guys are seeing from your perspective in terms of retirements and morale and the reasons the recruiting aren't happening and that kind of thing. Can you give us some feedback on that in terms of the numbers you're seeing? And
Well, the chief touched on retirements in his report, and I think he said 3 in the next month. I'm aware of like another one that's probably gonna be gone within the next 6 months. I know of another 18 officers that have applications in the pipeline to other departments, whether they're in backgrounds. Some actually have job offers. So I know 18 that are looking to leave, and I know there's others that are considering it. Some of the issues and why officers are leaving, it's expensive to live in Berkeley. Very few officers support the city, and as Chief mentioned, we're in contract negotiations with the city. So depending on how that contract negotiation ends up going, I would suspect that a large chunk of that 18 would probably go, although money isn't the only reason why officers are looking at leaving. There's a perceived lack of support politically in the city, whether from the council or the public at large. There's a sense amongst our members that the city doesn't value the professionalism and experience and the services the Berkeley Police Department provides. She touched on it, and Commissioner Pritchett, about opportunities within the police department due to staffing levels. If we lose, say, the 18 plus the 4 retirements that are coming up, 22 positions, there will basically be no special assignments in the Berkeley Police Department. The only job that Berkeley cops will work will be patrol. So as far as career development, it's done. And I would expect that, or anticipate that more officers will end up leaving, especially younger officers that we've recently recruited. The PRC itself, there's a perception that the commission doesn't have the training or experience to evaluate alleged police misconduct or weigh in on police department policy. And when they hear about the Police Review Commission trying to get more power, without the legitimacy, there's some serious concerns amongst our members. So that's something that comes up. Parking. We don't have parking for all of our employees. We have some parking within our compound, or within our police department, but a good number of our officers have to park 6 to 7 blocks away and walk in. We've got officers with their cars broken into. We had one officer recently that was probably going to be robbed as he was getting out of his car and showing up to work. So parking is something that is a huge issue. Lack of industry standard tools like tasers and canines. Our cops that can't afford to live in the city can get jobs closer to home where they can get special assignments and have industry standard tools like canines and tasers. So that's something that comes up for reasons people are talking about. And training. Our members care about protecting the citizens of Berkeley, and I know just about everybody that I work with would be willing to lay their life down to protect people in the city. And so when they're willing to do that, they're willing to make sacrifices, but politically, this conversation about the militarization of the police and trying to get the Berkeley Police Department an urban shield, that really rubs our members the wrong way when they just want to be trained to save lives. They want to be trained to do their job safely, so that way when they're trying to save lives, they can go home at the end of their shifts as well. So just kind of the politicalization of training is something that rubs our members the wrong way too. And those are kind of the highlights. I mean, they're varied for officer to officer, but these are kind of the common ones that come up more and more as you talk to people.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Holy cow.
I did have a question for the chief or Sergeant Johnson as well. Just in regards to what we're doing today.
Say again?
Yeah.
Just in regards of what we're doing today, discussing how the PRC can address this issue and help you with this. Have you thought of any possible ways that the PRC can get involved? Any input for us on how we can go about this?
I mean, I've expressed before some things that Sergeant Ross had brought up as well, which I think has to do with a sense of what can the PRC do is I think consider itself in terms of influence and legitimacy as received by the minimum of the police department. And I felt that it's more proper for me, rather than to say what that is, that to encourage you to explore it for yourself. I don't want to be the middle person in that discussion. Sergeant Ross, in his capacity as a member of the Berkeley Police Association, is an appropriate place minimally to start that conversation. I was a little discouraged quite candidly, when I said, you know, we're open for applications and consider pushing that through your networks. And listening to the meeting later, there were comments about, you know, we're not the Police Recruitment Commission, and I felt those were kind of mocking and emblematic of the lack of support that people feel, and that's an issue. I'm not so naive as to think that the commission should go out and is not the Police Recruitment Commission, but constructive ways to support. For example, constructive ways to support hiring and in considering constructive ways to deal with the staffing issue. I think that's kind of up for the commission to come up with. I think Sergeant Ross has outlined a number of things, and that I would sort of, you know, respectfully yield the floor to a number of those. For my part, as leader of the organization, I am leaning hard into continuing to support our efforts to recruit and to hire, to maintain our high levels, to not lower our standards, but to find the high quality people, whether it's from within our community or people who live elsewhere. It doesn't matter. I'm looking for high quality people who come into the organization and to serve the people of Berkeley. Understand that I, and with the support of our command staff, are going to have to potentially make difficult decisions as we sort of keep ourselves together pending restaffing ourselves. And any support in all of that would obviously be greatly appreciated. And I think that if you were to look through the lens of how it is to work, and I guess look through the lens of a Berkeley police officer and consider that lens in the actions that you take, I think that's a place to look at.
I guess what I wonder, and I don't have studies to back it up, but in the 90s, there was a lot of emphasis on community policing. In the 90s, it seemed like the kind of police officer that was being sought was somebody who could connect with young people, somebody who was interested that wanted to do that sort of work. That the relationships were a leverage in dealing with the issue of crime, of local crime. And that to be able to leverage those relationships and to influence young people or whoever, that was a priority. And I'm old enough, and so are you, to remember when Berkeley used to be a department that did not want to be militarized. You know, that there was a regulation that the rifles had to be pointed, and they couldn't be pointed up in the patrol cars, they had to be pointed down. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and you're mischaracterizing it, but go ahead.
I'm sure technically I'm wrong, but I do remember that there was a concern about the way that the police department was portraying itself. What I'm suggesting is that because this is a national problem, there's something about the institution of policing as it has evolved over the last couple of decades that is somehow less appealing to applicants. Now we could say that the reason that it's the critics of police that have ruined it for everybody and now nobody wants to be a police officer. But I'm going to say, what if it's something different? What if people have been critiquing the institution of policing and saying that it's time to change? And that the change that it seems like is being offered to us is just to become more militarized in industry standards and tasers and dogs, and that weaponry defines the modern police department, or is there something else? You know, when speaking with a Berkeley police officer who has an MSW, who actually makes those connections around mental health, who actually has done some good responding to 5150 calls. I think that there's different characters of different police departments, and there's different priorities and different ways of being in the community. And I'm curious about if there was something else that was being offered by Berkeley Police Department that didn't involve more weapons, but involved a more holistic and comprehensive approach to relating to the community. That it might attract people with more of a humanities background, more of a social work background, rather than more of a soldier background. Because it sounds to me like what the community has been trying to ask for is something less militarized. And I don't know if it's been tried, if the offerings of the BPD for professional development had a whole different flavor. If we keep trying to advertise these jobs and the applicant pool is drying up, what about characterizing them in a new way? What about describing what it means to be a Berkeley Police Department officer in a different way? And that there's a different skill set that is, it's not to say that, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of all the guns, all the special trainings, but I'm saying that the emphasis is different. That's just crazy town, right?
I completely disagree with almost everything you said. You are completely off base and you cast a false narrative in so many ways, and I haven't been taking notes or I would respond. But I just want to say, and it's not a surprise, that the way you see the world and the way I see the world are completely different with that. You speak as if you know about the 19, 20 people that I've hired since I've been chief, including people from this community, people with impressive backgrounds. You've please let me finish. It's frustrating for me. We have hired and continue to hire the highest quality people we can. The humanity that comes through these applicants is huge. The cast of militarization is a distraction to me in so much of what I say. People aren't coming here trying to get hired because we have patrol rifles. They're coming here because they've heard this is a particular organization. They're interested in working in a place that's been progressive in the past. They're interested in working in a diverse police department, which polices a diverse community. They're impressed by the ride-alongs and the way cops treat each other and the way cops treat people on the street. That's discussions that I have with folks when they're coming in. You have no idea, apparently, that we have been doing and will do again, like youth basketball. You don't know about what we're doing, and it's admittedly frustrating to me. This casting of our department through the lens that you bring to it is simply unfair, and it's uninformed. And if you want to talk about policing, community policing in 1995, let's talk about it. Let's talk about an agency that had 205 officers, not 160. An agency that fielded a dozen bike officers out in the community who are seeing face-to-face or riding around the community, where you have the resources to do that kind of engagement, where those bike officers are really, really appreciated and out there, where you have an agency that has not just a Berkeley High School resource officer, who in the false narrative is there to, I guess, harass, threaten, annoy, and arrest high school kids, but in the real world is there to interact with kids, to provide resources, to be approachable, to create relationships, to build on the safety and well-being of the students while they go to school. You didn't have one at Berkeley High, you had one at each middle school. And if you talk to students at those middle schools, you would hear about it. You'd hear about the influence that person had. So, while, for example, you're critical because we had an incident where the school where you work was put on lockdown, and that came back to me or us as, what's your policy about lockdowns? I'm suggesting that kind of thing, when officers hear it, is troubling, is it disincentivizing. So I didn't take notes. I would disagree with much of what you said. We are hiring excellent people. There are serious national problems. There is the idea that when a person puts on a police uniform, they're putting on the history of the profession, including the negative parts of that profession. I get that, and I think our people get that. But their performance, the lack of negative outcomes, the relative lack of harms, has been extraordinary to me, and I'm biased. However, when you have a department that has major problems, as you well know, you spend all your time in federal court on civil rights violations, and you spend millions settling those cases or having those cases be found against you. That's what characterizes departments in need of reform. That kind of reform